Good morning, everyone. It's lovely to be here. I keynoted the first lead dev 10 years ago. It's hard to believe it. Now I'm one of the old people. That's exciting. Escaping the rewrite trap. So this talk is about how do you escape this trap, because it happens to all of us. What do you do when your platform is failing? And we can use the term platform actually pretty generously, even though a lot of this talk is aimed at people doing platform engineering. The reality is, I've been through this issue in all kinds of environments. At Rent the Runway, when I was leading the engineering team there, and we were stuck in a Drupal monolith that just would not scale, and we could not change. But what do you do when you're in this kind of train wreck situation? You cannot move forward. You've made as many incremental changes as you could possibly make to the system that you're in, and you know that that's not going to get you where you need to be. And so you think, okay, well, I'm going to rewrite and get myself out of this mess, because it cannot possibly be harder to rewrite this system than it is to do anything else. The problem is that rewrites pretty much always fail. And so instead of rewriting, this talk is actually about re-architecting. What should you do, what you should do instead of rewriting, how to make changes internally while sort of limiting the chase of change and making yourself more successful. All right, so why do rewrites fail when re-architectures succeed? Let's start with this basic question. Complexity is our first area of concern, right? Okay, you like my fake graph. I love to make fake graphs for talks occasionally. So yes, sometimes you have a proof of concept, something small that you made very recently that hasn't lived for very long, that doesn't have very many users, and sure, you can rewrite that. That's fine, right? I'm not saying you never rewrite anything. But at some tipping point, you have a system that has lived for long enough, that has accrued enough unknown change, that has accrued enough users, that it starts to become exponentially harder to rewrite that system, to actually understand all of the things about it and get it rewritten. Whereas while re-architecting does become harder over time as your systems grow, they tend to be easier to do than a complete rewrite after that tipping point, right? Rewrites are hard because you don't know what the code is doing. So to illustrate this point, when I joined Rent the Runway, we were in the middle of this real failure of this big Drupal monolith. And I was told that the team had gone away for 2 days and done a hackathon, and they had gotten 80% of the monolith rewritten. And they were like, this is great, we're going to just like totally rewrite the whole thing. Of course, they had missed a few things like performance and all of the administrative tools, which are pretty important for a sort of consumer website, credits and gift cards, and just basically a whole bunch of other things, right? It is actually really hard to know what a big, long-lived system does. Now, furthermore, if you are building platforms, you have the additional problem of Hiram's law, which is with a sufficient number of users of any API, it doesn't matter what you say the API does or doesn't do, people are going to depend on all observable behaviors, right? So a system that I particularly admire is the Chubby Lock system out of Google. They wrote a great paper on it, and one of the things they say in their paper is that people came to depend on our availability, so much so that they failed to handle errors properly. So we had to synthetically fail some requests in excess of SLO. We literally had to learn that if we didn't actively fail things, people would never learn how to do error handling. They would just not do it, right? This is a real issue in platforms, in any kind of platform system, any kind of API. Okay, so there's a lot of complexity. We also have this issue of the second system effect, which I'm sure you've all heard of the mythical man month. If you haven't, I don't know, you're living under a rock a little bit. No, I'm kidding. It's a very famous book in tech. And it was written back in like the 70s about projects that were run in the 50s and 60s. So this concept of rewriting systems is hard has been around for a long time. This is something we kind of know. And the reasons that people often remember are, oh, people go in this and they have inflated expectations and they're overconfident. But I think an interesting point that isn't discussed as much, that comes up in this second system effect write-up in Mythical Man Month, is that often, even when we succeed in doing a rewrite, which is pretty rare, you often find that what you have done is redesigned the obsolete. You have built something to solve the problem of 3 to 5 years ago when you started the rewrite. And since you went over here to the side to rewrite this thing and you left the old system over here for people to just sort of struggle along with, they figured out how to struggle along. They got past the bottlenecks and the issues that they were having with that system, or even worse, the technology moved on, so much so that they don't really care about this system so much. So now you've redesigned something and you've launched this big thing and you're like, great, we replaced this thing, nobody cares anymore. This is a real risk of rewrites, particularly in the platform space. So, complexity hurts us. But the other problem that people don't think about often is that platform teams are really not staffed for novelty. So if you are not familiar with this sort of pioneer settlers, town planners model by Stephen Mordley, you can Google that later. It's a sort of useful mental model for thinking about the stages of sort of developing new things and the types of people that go into those stages, right? You have your pioneers who are very comfortable with ambiguity, who are comfortable going out there and risking things and failing and finding out the new frontier, right? And then when they have found a new frontier, settlers move in and they stabilize things and they start to scale things. And then if you're really successful over time, you get your town planners. And you get those people who can really, make efficiencies and make a big system run well. Well, your platform teams are somewhere in that settler town planner land, right? If you have a good platform team, they are probably not people who want to go out there and innovate, because that's just not really the work of platforms, right? We need to scale, we need to balance change and stability, we need to keep up with customer growth, right? Or at the sort of extreme case, when you're at a really big company and a really foundational system, you may very well want to optimize predictability and other illities of the system over feature speed and innovation. So your team is not a great team for doing really innovative, big, new projects. They're also probably pretty stressed because you're failing, right? If you're doing a rewrite, you're in fail whale space, right? You are stressed out. And you probably don't want to create a completely secondary team to build something new while a different team sits there and supports this old failing system. Because frankly, who's going to stay around to support the old failing system while this other team goes off and builds something new? Not very many people, right? And people don't want to do that. So you're not going to be able to kind of separate this as cleanly as you think.
Hope you're enjoying this video. But did you know Lead Dev has lots more to offer?
So webinar, podcasts, I even like articles, conferences, events, and most importantly, community.
And even thinking about like process, tech, and people, which is how Lead Dev website is laid out, I really think this is the #1 learning platform for me as an engineering manager.
Don't forget to check out leaddev.com.
So why does re-architecting work, despite all of these failing issues with rewrites? Well, the nice thing about re-architecting is it provides natural guardrails. You are basically saying that you are going to expand and change the system capabilities, but you're not trying to completely change the entire system, right? Systems architectures have fundamental design decisions that will and can forever constrain the system's capabilities. But you can improve those capabilities over time, and you can change certain of those architectural components, right? So instead of tuning database queries, you can think about moving to a more scalable data storage system. That doesn't mean you have to change the whole system, right? But you may change that underlying data storage component, right? You may take a single point of failure and distribute it. You can do a lot within these restrictions. You can, in fact, do something that may be a little bit of the ship of Theseus, right? Where you started with one thing, you changed a board over time. Is it still the same ship? Does it matter? It's better now, right? It removes the all-at-once mental model of the work. And it's hard, right? I think of it as more like fixing the space station than, fixing the engine on a plane while it's flying in some ways, right? You have to prepare, you have to think, and yet we can do that. We can fix space stations because we have done a lot of upfront work and planning to make it possible for us to keep ourselves alive and up there, right? So the evolution of successful platforms tends to look much more like scrappy platform that may have even been written by pioneering application teams or product engineering teams, not platform teams, that become something more important to a wider group, that are incrementally re-architected into something scalable, And if they become really foundational, depending on the growth of your business, you may incrementally re-architect them again to become the robust platform that you need. All right, so hopefully I've convinced you that re-architecting is actually a good way to think about this problem. So what are the principles for success here now? This is a generic problem of software engineering that you're all going to face at least once in your careers. I've actually probably done it directly myself at least 3 times and then led teams doing these kinds of re-architectures, I don't know, five or more times, right? So to do this well, you need to start with actually some vision and plan it. Now, we aren't pioneers. Your platform teams aren't going to be pioneering teams. But you still need some ambition and vision because you're going to be proposing a big, long-running project, and you're going to need to get over the hump of actually selling this thing, right? You know, this is still a often 3 to 5 year effort, totally, right? That doesn't mean it's a 3 to 5 year effort to value, but big re-architectures, if you're really talking about foundational big platforms, they can take a number of years to successfully lead. You need a lot of headcount, you need a lot of planning, there's a lot of investment that's going to go into this process. So you want to have something that is actually compelling to everyone, your engineers, but also your stakeholders, in order to justify doing this. So you want to start by identifying some long-term goals for this project, right? The major long-term goals really should be around features. Can you find some substantial business value that could be delivered only with a new architecture, right? Now, this substantial business value may actually come in the form of, for example, efficiency. Are there performance enhancements that could act as a feature to unlock additional application capabilities if you had them, right? Sometimes you make something significantly faster, and applications realize they can do a lot more with it, right? Sometimes it might be reliability. If you can increase the system from 3 to 5 nines reliability, you may very well be able to sell to different kinds of customers. So again, this reliability is a big capability that can actually also be part of your feature set. Security is another major area that you might consider for their long-term goals. You may want the system, obviously, to be less likely to get breached, more secure by default, easier to maintain compliance, right? Adding, again, compliance features can also be a feature that you sell to your customers. So all of these things can be part of your long-term goals and should be areas that you consider as part of this rewrite. You want to look at adjacent systems. So you want to look at the systems that are also being run in your company that are similar or have sort of a little bit of perhaps overlapping capabilities and ask yourself, could we absorb these systems? Could we simplify our portfolio of offerings to have fewer things that do more? That can be something you do. You want to also look at your open source and vendor components. It's very likely you've got some open source and/or vendor components that you use to build this. And you may be saying to yourself, did we make the right bets here? Maybe we bet on an open source piece of software that is no longer really the winning standard. One re-architecture I oversaw, I should say, moved from Mercurial to Git because when they built it, Mercurial and Git were kind of in competition. By the time we realized we needed to redo it, obviously, Git was by far the winner, right? You may also realize, though, that the open source or vendor components that you relied on, there's nothing out there that really does what you need for your business at your scale, and you actually need to build something yourself, right? That is not necessarily going to be an open source thing. That's okay, right? Now you're going to start to put the dampeners on it. So you've got some big ideas. You've thought about the architecture. You've thought about the landscape. You want to make sure you've right-sized this to the company and the rate of growth. So if you are planning and proposing a scaling opportunity that's like, oh, we could scale to millions and millions, and you are at the thousands and not looking to get to millions and millions anytime in the next 5 years, this may not be the right thing to do. On the other hand, if you're going to do a lot of work to only get a little bit of value, and you think you're going to be growing much faster than that, again, you may need to go back to the drawing board here. Also, you need to counterbalance your big vision with the realistic thoughts about what it will take to migrate. None of you guys don't do this. Don't look at me like, oh, of course we do that. You don't. I've read at so many teams, and migrations are not the thing anybody wants to think about when it comes to proposing big new things, and yet this is the major risk and major cost of this effort. You want to migrate millions of lines of SQL to a key value store? Okay. You want to migrate all those undocumented stored procedures to something new? Okay. That's a big effort. Give me some numbers on that. How much is that really going to cost? Right? This is a non-trivial exercise. And so if you don't think about some of those migration costs up front, you may be trying to design yourself a system that you're never, ever, ever going to get anywhere near. Finally, you're going to want to determine your major 12-month wins. I say 12-month wins because if you go away and try to do a re-architecture and you can't deliver anything of business value within 12 months, people are going to start to wonder why they are investing so much money and time and energy into this thing that hasn't shown any value, right? It is just simply a risk that the project will get defunded if you can't deliver value more quickly. You want to look for some goals that are audacious business goals. They move the needle for some kind of chosen business. You want to have a partner that actually cares about this and that is closer to the product, closer to the business that you are supporting. You actually want to look for a couple of those partners, right? So you're looking for things that can add substantial new value to some part of the organization, which the old architecture could not have done, right? You want a couple of them because in any given year, a business might say at the beginning of the year, oh, we totally need this. By the end of the year, their plans have changed, right? So you're kind of trying to minimize your risk. But the ultimate goal here is getting those new architectural components into production within 12 months and serving some amount of real customer load. Think big is sometimes wrong, right? Sometimes you have a big idea, you're trying to execute it, and you can't make any progress on it in 12 months. And this is actually a sign that maybe this isn't the right thing for you to be doing. All right, then you need to sell the plan. You've got a plan, this is all well and good, but actually to get things done, you have to get people to buy into that. You've got to sell it to your team. So if you're in a management position like me, you're going to need to get other people convinced that this is important to do. Because if you are managing a platform team, there are probably a lot of different ideas for re-architectures that could be done. A lot of people have these big projects they want to do. And often they require help from other parts of the team in order to do them. You cannot do them all at once. Do not try to do them all at once. Your team is going to be working hard, and some of them are going to be sacrificing what they think they should be doing to support this other team. So you need to spend some time selling this. This is actually where disagree and commit comes into play. So I think a lot of people think disagree and commit is like people disagree and then you say, okay, but I'm the boss and this is what we're doing, and then they just commit to the idea. But actually disagree and commit, for it to work, requires discussion, requires people to write down proposals and to get the right group of people together to actually discuss, disagree, flesh out, and ultimately be able to come to a decision that they can commit to, right? You have to cultivate that discussion and that understanding of the proposals before you drive that commitment. You then need to sell this to your stakeholders, right? So you've got a couple of businesses that have said they could get value from this work. That's a very good start. You may need to sell it to other people, though. You may need to take advantage of end of life or other kinds of extrinsic deadlines that are coming up. You may also need to look at some big, scary graphs. This shows that our performance is going to fall off a cliff. Our scaling, we're not going to be able to scale. We can only take on 10 new customers when we really want to be able to take on 100, whatever, right? These are good ways to sell this kind of expensive project to stakeholders. And by the way, your computers are not your stakeholders. I get it that you want to reduce toil, you want to make your systems better, more efficient, nicer, but computers are not the people who decide whether or not your team gets budget, whether or not your team gets headcount, right? They're not your only stakeholders. So yes, obviously you should be reducing your toil, but you shouldn't be selling to the computers. All right, execution, I could talk for a long time about execution, but I'm just going to give you a few gotchas to think about. The first gotcha is the new hire from Google, Facebook, Amazon, whatever, that has done this before, or really they haven't done it before. They worked on one tiny piece of the giant 1,000-person team at that company that did it before, and they are positive that you should do what this big company has done, and I am going to show you the way. They are the walking embodiment of second system syndrome, okay? Now, they can also be super, super useful and have a lot of valuable insights to bring, but they are often the person who's going to overdo things. And so if they are very new to the company, they don't have the context of your business, they don't have the context of what's been going on and why the decisions have been made, you probably don't want them running this kind of project, right? Just be aware of that. If you were doing a big rework of your consumer-facing website or app, you would have design and user research and product in there, thinking long and hard about how you're going to introduce this new stuff to the consumers. We often underestimate the amount of work that it takes to do that, even for platform-type things, right? You've got to think about compatibility, documentation, adoption plans, early testing groups. You may need to support multiple versions of this system and route to the appropriate version depending on what's going on, right? So there's a lot of work that needs to happen to actually plan for the impact on users. Finally, you need to think about correctness. The first re-architecting I ever did was taking a distributed system, taking a singleton system and turning it into a distributed system. This was within, again, the context of the existing system. We did not rewrite the whole thing. We just simply figured out how to sort of distribute a core part of the logic. One of the very first things we did in this project was we made the test harnesses able to simulate the system in distributed mode so that we could identify all of the different things that were going to break and start to fix them as we built through this system, right? So thinking about how you're actually going to make sure that the system does the right thing over time as you move these components is actually pretty fun and non-trivial, right? Do you have appropriately isolated lower environments, staging or whatever, right? If you're just trying to do this rewrite within the same staging that everybody else depends on, you are going to be murdered because you're going to be breaking it all the time, right? You need to be able to test without disturbing the rest of the company. And by the way, this is not a good place to test in prod. Yes, you may do canary releases and synthetic testing, synthetic monitoring, but you really want to make sure that you're not just relying on a sort of fast failure, oh, we'll release in prod, and if it's broken, we'll roll back model. That really does not work for major re-architecting efforts. All right, so finally, strategy. Dude, where's my strategy? We're on the tech strategy stage right now, and you may think that, and I think it would be a reasonable criticism to say, Camille, you just told us that basically platform teams aren't innovative, and they don't build brand new things, and we should not be trying to move super, super fast, and we should be very thoughtful and careful with all of this. So are we just not strategic? And my answer to you is this. If you have worked at a company that has been around for long enough to have gone through various technology evolutions, moving to the cloud, continuous delivery, changing your architectures, we're all going through this weird AI thing right now. What you will start to realize if you do this enough times is that these things are, first of all, hard to adopt when you are in an existing company that has a bunch of old stuff that's been around for a while, and that they are easier to adopt when you have people that have been thinking about how can we keep this company regularly moving forward and evolving to be able to take on new things at the right pace for the company. Platform teams are not about supporting revolution, but we are supporting evolution, right? We are the sort of engine that allows for the organization to play out a good evolutionary strategy over time, to move applications to these new models as needed, select for the next important thing in the organization, allow things to die off that aren't serving us anymore, right? This is an important part of the technology strategy that this is really, in my opinion, actually most of what technology strategy really is. It is occasional big innovations, and it is a lot of how do we just keep things moving forward at a reasonable pace without completely disrupting everyone on the team, but also without just getting stuck in the same place. And you're never really done, right? The Springfield tire fire is never out, and there is always another thing to be fixed. There is always another re-architecture to be done. The minute you finish one re-architecture, somebody's going to find another one that they want to do. So this is something that is actually really valuable to get good at because it will come up again and again in your career. All right, so in conclusion, you were in a train wreck and everything was not fine. And you thought, oh, great, I'm going to rewrite. Wait a minute, what did that lady say at that conference? Oh, maybe I won't rewrite. Maybe I'm going to resist the urge to go over here and create something brand new. And instead, we're going to try to think about, could we change some of the big pieces? Could we do a re-architecture? And so you crafted a vision, you made a plan, you sold that plan, and then you were thoughtful and careful throughout your execution. And you've supported the evolution of your company to a more strategic future. Wonderful. All right, that's it. Thank you all very much. I'll be doing a book signing tomorrow if you want to see me.